ever greater expense. So who can he possibly serve then?
In 1998, Citicorp and Travelers merged to form Citigroup, the largest financial services company in the world. The merger violated the Glass-Steagall Act, a law passed after the Great Depression, which prevented banks with consumer deposits from engaging in risky investment banking activities.
It was illegal to acquire Travelers. Greenspan said nothing. The Federal Reserve gave them an exemption for a year, and then they got the law passed.
But the danger here in thinking that something like Glass-Steagall could have saved us from this is that the underlying obfuscation of the currency still multiplies artificial indebtedness into terminal failure. Glass-Steagall, or the proposition of restoring Glass-Steagall, has no potential benefit whatsoever if we rectify our problem, because the problem is the underlying obfuscation of the currency, and when we rectify that, there will be no banking. So if we solve the issues, Glass-Steagall would have no applicability at all. It would affect nothing, because we solve these issues by, of course, creating a common monetary foundry under mathematically perfected economy, which is the only prescription for solving inflation, deflation, and maladisposition, systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, and inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness by interest. Glass-Steagall is impertinent. A further issue here is that what's going on during the Clinton administration is we had so far progressed toward terminal failure that we need to reflate the circulation at an ever-escalating rate. And this is the whole monetary reason for the false dot-com boom. If you were a software engineer during these years, you would have remarked at how all these new startups didn't really offer anything new, didn't have a possible chance of contributing to production or wealth in any real way. Few of these companies even survived the purported boom. Even at its end, fewer still had even made their first penny of profit yet. So this was a false boom, but what it served the purpose of was to reflate the circulation above the creditworthiness of the private sector, which had already been exceeded. So this is a prelude to further federal overspending. It's an attempt to reflate the circulation by in the private sector, which is unsustainable. So this explains the falsification of promise and the inevitable failure of this purported boom.
In 1999, at the urging of Summers and Rubin, Congress passed the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act, known to some as the Citigroup Relief Act. It overturned Glass-Steagall and cleared the way for future mergers.
Why do you have big banks? Well, because banks like monopoly power, because banks like lobbying power, because banks know that when they're too big, they will be bailed.
Markets are inherently unstable, or at least potentially unstable. And appropriate metaphor is the oil tankers. They're very big, and therefore you have to put in compartments to prevent the sloshing around of oil from capsizing the boat. The design of the boat has to take that into account. And after the Depression, the regulations actually introduced these very watertight compartments.
This, of course, is absolutely not true. The compartments aren't watertight. It matters little how big or small they are, because the obfuscation of the currency inherently and irreversibly, so long as we maintain a vital circulation, perpetually increases the sum of artificial indebtedness until we suffer complete dispossession. No purported regulation which purportedly obstructs the purported banking industry from making unwise investments in an area or a volume of industry which can only fail as a consequence of the obfuscation of the currency, can possibly protect us from the ramifications. Of course, even if you eliminated all this investment entirely, the system would still fail. We might say, well, then the banking industry, which was investing in these things, at least wasn't engaging in these further improprieties by which it takes from us. But we would still suffer at a terminus predicated by the fact that the sum of artificial indebtedness had inevitably exceeded our capacity to service it any longer, or sustain it artificially by federal overspending.
And deregulation has led to the end of compartmentalization.
The next crisis came at the end of the 90s. The investment banks fueled a massive bubble in internet stocks, which was followed by a crash in 2001 that caused $5 trillion in investment losses.
To his further discredit, then, Clinton ever since has maintained that he presided, nonetheless, over the greatest industrial expansion in modern history. A totally falsified expansion which couldn't even be sustained, which never made any profit, and served only to reflate the circulation of what it was depleted by paying principal and interest out of circulation against the ever-escalated sums of artificial indebtedness, which he could have prevented by adopting mathematically perfected economy, and instead only enabled his political cohorts and those in the private sector to further loot the country, even necessarily relieving them of restrictions under which they couldn't endure against their own multiplication of artificial indebtedness into terminal failure.
The Securities and Exchange Commission, the federal agency which had been created during the Depression to regulate investment banking, had done nothing.
In the absence of meaningful federal action, and there has been none, and given the clear failure of self-regulation, it has become necessary for others to step in and adopt the protections needed.
Eliot Spitzer's investigation revealed that the investment banks had promoted internet companies they knew would fail.
Aye, but their purported need to exist was predicated by the deflation of the circulation, which was a result of escalated multiplication of artificial indebtedness, which, if we ever hope to do this by actual industry, required us to so stretch the truth as hoping that these purported endeavors might survive further escalation of artificial indebtedness, which of course they did not. Nonetheless, we do not solve our problems, therefore, unless we adopt actual monetary solution, which of course absolutely requires eradicating all of this exploitation, and most particularly terminal exploitation by interest, which inherently and irreversibly multiplies artificial indebtedness in proportion to a circulation, which of course we observed all this while.
Stock analysts were being paid based on how much business they brought in, and what they said publicly was quite different from what they said privately.
InfoSpace, given the highest possible rating, dismissed by an analyst as a piece of junk. Excite, also highly rated, called such a piece of crap.
The defense that was proffered by many of the investment banks was not, you're wrong. It was, everybody's doing it and everybody knows it's going on, and therefore nobody should rely on these analysts anyway.
Well, of course, that's not the only issue, and it's certainly not even close to the most important issue, because the need was to reflate the circulation against the vast deflation of the circulation, which was transpiring as a result of all of the multiplication of artificial indebtedness to that point. This is something which must transpire, the reflation of the circulation. So it was a necessary hope that somehow such a thing could succeed. It was a doomed experiment from the very beginning because of the obfuscation of the currency. But so regulation isn't about to solve the problem, because if we don't reflate the circulation in the private sector, we're still going to assume the same debt in the public sector in further accumulation of federal, state, etc. Public debt. So the fault of all this presentation is that it doesn't really address the most critical issue of all.
In December 2002, 10 investment banks settled the case for a total of $1.4 billion and promised to change their ways. Scott Talbot is the chief lobbyist for the Financial Services Roundtable, one of the most powerful groups in Washington, which represents nearly all of the world's largest financial companies.
Are you comfortable with the fact that several of your member companies have engaged in large-scale criminal activity?
You'll have to be specific.
Okay.
First of all, criminal activity shouldn't be accepted, period.
Since deregulation began, the world's biggest financial firms have been caught laundering money, defrauding customers, and cooking their books again and again and again.
Taking care of business every day. Taking care of business every way. I've been taking care of business. It's all mine.
Credit Suisse helped funnel money for Iran's nuclear program and for the Aerospace Industries Organization of Iran, which builds ballistic missiles.
Any information that would identify it as Iranian would be removed.
The bank was fined $536 million. Citibank helped funnel $100 million of drug money out of Mexico.
Did you comment that she should, quote, lose any documents connected with the account?
I said that in a kidding manner. It was at the early stages of this. I did not mean it seriously.
Between 1998 and 2003, Fannie Mae overstated its earnings by more than $10 billion.
These accounting standards are highly complex and require determinations over which experts often disagree.
Aye, but why do we have financial companies overstating their earnings, which is, of course, happening across the board? Because they need to borrow more money to sustain their debtor base against failure. So this is a natural consequence of the obfuscation of the currency as well.
CEO Franklin Raines, who used to be President Clinton's budget director, received over $52 million in bonuses. When UBS was caught helping wealthy Americans evade taxes, they refused to cooperate with the U.S. government.
Would you be willing to supply the names?
If there's a treaty framework